Welcome back to Music Theory Logic. My name's Andrew, also known as drusounds, d.r.u, and today's going to be another music theory breakdown. Today we're talking about the hit record, The Business, by none other than Tiësto. Let's go ahead into the Logic session. So here we are inside Logic Pro. If you haven't seen one of these before, basically I've recreated this track layer by layer. I'm not going to play the original because I don't have the copyright. If you haven't heard the song in a while, maybe pause the video and go check out that original, Tiësto, The Business. If you find these helpful, you would help me out a lot by subscribing to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Without further ado, here is my rendition of The Business.
So let's get down to business.
Cool. So obviously that track feels a lot smaller without the vocal. You heard the vocal in the break section. I just thought it was kind of cool to throw that in there, and it's short enough that hopefully this video doesn't get flagged so everybody can keep improving from it. So again, the main focus of this is going to be music theory, the scales, the chords in the song, and the different layers. Hope this can help you with your music production. I wrote this music theory textbook. If you're not familiar with it, I'll link to it below. Essentially, I present music theory in this way with what's called piano roll, where the piano is on its side, like you see in any modern audio producing machine, a digital audio workstation, or a software program you make beats on. So without further ado, let's go into the music theory. This song is in the key of E flat minor. E flat minor sounds like any other minor scale, except it starts on E flat. We have the notes E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat, C flat, D flat, and E flat. So I call this B a C flat because we have this rule in theory that we're always going to have one of every letter in a full scale. That sounds like this. Oh, let's turn it on. It sounds like this. All right. So one really common thing that I talk about in these videos is that if you're already on a program like this making music, you don't have to necessarily even remember your scales from start to finish. If you remember your reference key, so a reference key is like the most basic equivalent of that scale. For any minor scale, that's going to be A minor. If you go from the note A on a piano all the way up using the white keys to the next A, that's A minor. Sounds like this. If we take that whole scale and move it up, so instead of starting on A, we start on E flat, the note right, the black key right before E, or the black key right after D, we would find all the notes from our scale. So again, I've learned music theory the way many musicians before me did, from playing music and from studying harmony in school, essentially. And the way that's presented is in standard notation, stuff that looks like that with treble clef. And so that can be harder to follow. So hopefully you find that a little bit easier to follow. Now, there's not much going on musically or theory-wise aside from the chord progression that comes from that scale. The bass line is essentially following what call root notes from the chord progression. The fundamental chord progression is the one chord. That's an E flat minor. It has the notes E flat, G flat, and B flat. The D flat major, that has D flat, F, and A flat. B major, which has B, D, E flat, and G flat, or I guess we should call this C flat major, since again, that rule with one of every letter. But basically this is a B major chord or a C flat major chord. They're equivalents. Then finally we get a going back to the D flat major. Now I even mention this specific chord progression in the book, again linked below, because it is a really, really common chord progression. So this is an example of something where we don't need like a ton of theory knowledge to write chart-topping music. It's about how we use it past that in the overall production. So let's go ahead into each layer, and I'm going to show you where we find this chord progression. All right, moving into our music, let's start with our main chord sequence in the beginning. This thing, I'll play it on the pad. So essentially those are the four chords that I showed you in the beginning. They're just the phrasing or the rhythm that we play this is a little bit different. So we are at 120 beats per minute. That should be like the default tempo that most of your sessions start with in any of these programs, Fruity Loops, Ableton, Logic, Reason, you name it. So we're at 120 beats per minute. We start out with the first two chords I mentioned, the 1, the E flat minor, followed by the 7, the D flat major, followed by the 6, the C flat major, or we could also think of it as literally a B major chord. So the rhythm of that is a half note for the E flat, a half note for the D flat, and then basically a whole note for our 6. You could think of it as the second half is repeating right here. Now we don't play that chord again, but it's holding for that duration. So it's a half note, followed by a whole note. It basically goes chord 1, chord 2, chord 3, holds chord 3, back to chord 2, chord 1. Sometimes we hit it where we go chord 1, chord 2, chord 3, chord 3, chord 2, chord 1. Basically that. So this is separated into two instruments. I've got a pad playing, and I have a synth. We're using Arturia for that. Then we get the finger snap sound. This happens basically in the last 8 bars right before our drop. One cool thing about this song is we have a lot of lyrics. There's not a lot of like huge buildup sections, so the drops feel really impactful because it's almost like we don't expect them as much in the same way. So this finger snap is literally just happening on a halftime or a standard backbeat, so beat 2 and 4. I'm using 2 of these. They're slightly out of time. I'm trying to mimic the sound from the original. And side note, these are samples that I recorded. Let me know in the comments, but I'd be happy to give you guys some of my my personal samples. All right. Again, not much happening besides that chord progression. Now, when we go into the drop, there's some sound design elements, but music-wise, we're basically doing the same pattern. The chords are changing, or the notes are changing on the same rhythms. So one thing I talk about in a lot of these breakdowns, or with my students, is that music, regardless of how complicated the style is, really relies on repetition of some kind. So in this kind of music, it's really repeating the same thing over and over again, but because it's presented in different ways, it feels exciting. And that's something that you could apply to your own music, especially if you're making this kind of dance music. So the bass line follows the same rhythm. When it changes, we get some bass fills here. So what you see in the MIDI isn't exactly what you get. I'll play the sub on its own. All right, so there's rhythm in it that you hear already. That's created possible by the LFO. I'm using a halftime LFO pattern with this shape. It's tied to the bend minus of our the only oscillator we're really hearing. We're also tying it to our sub volume, so the second oscillator we're hearing, I guess. And then finally, I'm tying that to the low pass filter cutoff. All of that creates that movement in the bass. Now, these notes over here basically is a way for us to create the syncopation we hear without having to go back in and change the LFO patterns. So rhythmically, if you have that LFO set up, we're doing a full halftime of the E flat, half note of the E flat, a full half note of the D flat, a full half note of the B, then a syncopated B, 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 and B. So all the same notes. Again, we should call that C flat to be proper music theory people. But essentially, this is a dotted quarter note into an eighth note, followed by a dotted eighth note into a 16th note, followed by an eighth note. Now, this is basically quarter note or eighth note triplets, and this is kind of like a quarter note triplet. So that's where the syncopation comes from. Everything else is hitting on the one. So haven't talked about the drums. The kick drum is literally 4 on the floor. It's hitting all these quarter notes, very common for house music. That with the sub sounds like this. All right. Then there's a second bass. It's not really a bass because we don't have as much low end, but essentially this is a mid bass. It's playing the same notes, but it's echoing, if you would. So the sub plays E flat, then this plays the E flat, the sub plays the D flat, then this plays the D flat, sub plays the C flat, then this plays the C flat, and then they hit together at the end. The chords are changing, so that note is actually not in the chord that we have above, because essentially the sub is hitting this note or that note, so we essentially get a suspended harmony sound, if you will. Finally, we have our organ sort of instrument. This organ is a B3 from Arturia. We're just doing an octave of the one. Altogether, that looks and sounds like this. So you can see this is the mid bass, even though it's lower than our subs. What you see in the octave isn't necessarily what you get, because we have the oscillators move down an octave in Serum. So this is above this one, even though it doesn't look like it. And essentially that mid bass is repeating every 2 quarter notes. All right. For the final things to talk about for the main first drop section is just the clap section and the cymbals. After the first 4 measures of the drop, we get the clap. It's basically happening on a halftime backbeat, but there's some interesting stuff happening every other quarter note. So it hits on beat 1, beat 2, beat 4, beat 2, and then we get this cool fill section. It's hitting on the second 16th note, the 4th 16th note, and then hitting on the 4. This is where it was before, so you could think of like these as fills. But when it hits on the 4th, it's going through a bunch of delay. I've got 16th note delay, And all together, that sounds like this. So that pattern repeats on 2 full measures. The second measure, it does almost the same thing. So this is the standard backbeat. The only difference, we don't get the whole fills, we don't get the delay, and this happens on the second eighth note right before that. That all repeats. This is the same every drop. So that's our clap pattern. All right, finally, we get our standard upbeat house music cymbals. This is kind of a splashing hi-hat. It's literally on the second eighth note each time. It's slightly delayed. That's really important to give you that feel of swing in the track. It's super subtle, but again, it just helps also with our transients in the mastering. That now sounds like this. Cool. From there, we basically get our verse 2, if you will. It's over like a post drop section. So the kick is still happening. The kick is a lot smaller. So it almost feels like it's been altered on the mixer, like a DJM that a DJ like Tiësto is performing on, or whatever mixer your favorite DJ uses. The sub is also doing the same thing. However, we've altered the sound design slightly. I'm also filtering it. So on a sound design style, we're bringing in oscillator B. So that helps. We're using some FM from A. That creates kind of like the grittiness of that sound. We're then using some distortion, the compressor, and a filter. This section sounds, sounds like this. So really similar, just kind of like a different sound. We then get this clap fill filter, as I'm calling it. It's kind of like a buildup sound, if you will, but all on claps. This is kind of a common sound of the track. We get a lot of the claps. This track is really sort of like minimal, and that's what makes it hit so hard. The vocal is really the only thing we're missing here. The clap happens on at the end of the first full measure. We hit on the last 16th note. We're then hitting some syncopated notes. So on the upbeat, waiting, the last 16th note, the upbeat. This almost is reminiscent of a reggaeton rhythm. But I mentioned that in the rhythm section of the book, again, linked below. If you ever have any questions, if you get the book, feel free to reach out to me. I really made it to help everyone out there better understand their production so that we can all keep pushing music forward. So this fill section that happens is basically getting filtered. We then get the same clap that happens, the second 4-measure sequence. So all together, that sounds like this. All right, so this next section, that's the same as the intro. The only new thing we need to talk about is this pre-final drop section. It's the same chord progression that's happening. It's a new sound that we haven't heard. It's a little bit bigger, adds for some sonic development. And then rhythmically, we're doing 3 eighth notes in a row. That it's the same exact chord progression. It's again, the same thing. The rhythm has just changed. So we do the 3 eighth notes in a row, 3 eighth notes in a row, and then the final one for our C flat or our B major chord. We're going on the last 16th note right before, and then the same second eighth note. That looks like this. Cool. So I brought in the vocal there. Again, the vocal is a huge part of this this track. We're gonna notice that we have this closed hi-hat. I'm calling it build hi-hats. It's basically getting filtered in. That, along with a reverb trail from the vocal, which is why I have it in there, is basically the only things we have telling us this is a buildup. We then go straight into the drop, and again, the only thing we're missing from the drop is the main vocal. But I'm only playing this small section so it doesn't get flagged. Let's just hear this. I'll play this to the end, and we'll call it. Here it is.
I can't do this for another day. So let's get down to business.
So here comes the clap. Our delayed clap. Here come our cymbals. Cool. So hopefully you found that helpful. Once again, The Business by Tiësto is a smash hit record. It's very minimal. It's somewhat straightforward. The vocal is a huge part of the track, but hopefully you got some a little bit of nuggets of information that will help you better produce music. So once again, my name's Andrew. Thanks for tuning into Music Theory Logic. You'd help me out a lot if you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, and I will see you back here very soon. Have a great one.